What is up, ladies and gentlemen? It's Mr. E here, and I'm just editing the newest video that will probably be coming out Wednesday. It's again a behind-the-scenes tour, but this time it's for Creepshow. So there's going to be a lot of audio and pictures in this video. If I were you, watch this video with some headphones in. That way you can hear everything that John Murdy is saying. Also, thank you so much to Universal Studios and Halloween Horror Nights for inviting me to this event. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you guys enjoy the video.
One of the first anthology horror films. Last year we did Trick or Treat. Trick or Treat was obviously, inspired by Creepshow, as was a lot of other movies. But kind of the catalyst for doing the maze this year was that Shudder is doing a new TV series based on Creepshow, and it's being produced, co-directed, and all the makeup's being done by Greg Nicotero. So I think you guys know who Greg Nicotero is. If you don't, he's the head makeup artist for Walking Dead, but was also executive producer of Walking Dead and directed many of the episodes over the years. We've known Greg for a long, long time. Obviously, we did 4 Walking Dead mazes back in the day. We did the permanent attraction. We worked really closely with Greg and his team on all of that. So last year, I think it was opening weekend, I was sitting down with Greg and he started talking about Creepshow. And this is kind of typical for us. This is usually like, I'm already working on 2020 even though I'm still finishing this year. So Greg started talking about the fact that he was involved in this new TV series and wouldn't it be fun to do the maze. So we decided that it would be best to kind of mash up the original film and the new TV series. So there's 4 stories that you go through when you go through this maze. 3 from the 1982 film and 2 from the upcoming Shudder series that debuts in September. And there's also the prologue and epilogue, which are inspired by the film. Working with Greg and having known him for so long, one of the big advantages is first and foremost he's a makeup artist. So when we got into the new TV series, we were able to use the actual molds that Greg created for all of the creatures and monsters on his new show. So when you see the maze, you'll see what you see our characters wearing is the exact same thing that they used for the television series. But part of the conversation with Greg was how to approach the maze, and we both kind of landed on the same idea. Creepshow is inspired by comic books, specifically EC horror comics from the 1950s that George Romero would have grown up with. So we decided to really embrace that comic book aesthetic in the maze. That's why the facade of the maze is a giant comic book. So if we come over here, so something different we haven't done before. It's funny, when I got the artwork from Greg and his team for Shudder, the comic book was very pristine looking. It was like this beautiful, perfect, graphic. But kids who read horror comics roll them up, crumple them up, shove them under their bed so their parents don't find them. So we wanted to make it look aged and distressed. So my art director, production designer Chris Williams, was a big comic book fan when he was growing up. And so he dug out his old comic books and scanned them. So like everything down to the staples and the creases and the aging. Those are actually Chris's comic books combined with our graphic for Creepshow. Greg has a cameo. GN. Instead of EC, it's GN. The very first part of the maze we're going to walk through, it's a little dark in there, so might need some iPhone lights along the way, is if you're walking through the panels of the comic book, and we're using that to foreshadow the 5 stories we're going to experience in the maze. The other thing we thought would be fun would be to include the kind of goofy ads you would always find at the back of comic books, if you're a 99-pound weakling who gets sand kicked in his eyes, and how to become a muscle man, or how to get an authentic monkey's paw, or giant inflatable monster. So we have those recreated as well in the maze. So if you guys want to come on in, we'll walk through that. Just watch cables and forks. And then every year on the anniversary of his death, which happens to be Father's Day, she comes back to visit his grave. And on this particular Father's Day, he comes out of the grave and demands his cake that he never got all those years ago. So this section of the maze is dealing with Nathan Grantham coming up out of the grave. That's poor Bedelia, dead by his grave.
Oh my god, yeah.
Yeah, there she is.
There.
That door gets fixed.
Oh,
that's awesome.
And then this is the serving doors that Nathan comes out of with the platter, with her head on the platter, and he's like, I finally got my cake.
there you go.
Another thing that Greg and I talked about that was real important for Creepshow was the lighting. Whenever something horrific happens in the movie, it switches to this red and blue dramatic lighting, oversaturated, and it usually has these weird bolts behind the characters, and it's all done to mimic comic book panel art. So we're picking that up in the lighting. So a lot of the times when the monster comes out, we're lighting them red and blue from the sides. But in other cases, we're actually lighting up those kind of comic book-like panels behind them. So right as you leave here and you're getting ready to transition into the next story, you'll see one of those panels behind our Nathan Performer. So when it lights. So this next story in Creepshow is called The Crate, and it takes place back east of a small college where a janitor finds underneath a stairwell, he finds this old shipping crate that says Arctic Expedition, June 1834. So he calls the main professor of anthropology and tells him, hey, I found this thing and it might be something significant. So he leaves the party he's at, comes down to the college, and they pry open the crate, and unfortunately inside it is this beast that's still alive in the movie. I think he's referred to as Fluffy the Crate Beast, affectionately by fans. He's kind of like a diminutive ape crossed with a werewolf, kind of. He's got these razor-sharp teeth, but he's really small. He's maybe this big. But he's been living in this crate somehow for all these years. So he sucks the janitor in and eats him. So the first thing you're going to see when you come in here is the janitor's legs hanging out of this, kicking as he screams bloody murder. It's an animated effect. Probably one of the last details we do is blood. Over the years, we kind of invented our own formula for how we do blood on sets, because this is a very heavy trafficked area where people are going to be walking through here night after night after night. So we had to design something that would always retain its look of being wet and sticky, but that could stand up to that kind of traffic. So our props and dressing team over the years had all these different formulas, and they eventually landed on this formula we use. And we actually fabricate the puddles off-site now when we bring them in and set them down. But it's funny, when they apply it on the sets, it looks like bubble gum. It's like bright pink. So when we were doing The Shining, I walked into the elevator scene and I was just like, oh my God, what happened? It looks like bubble gum poured out of it. And then like 24 hours later, it looks like blood. It's just weird the way it dries. Fluffy's inside the crate as well. So as you're seeing the janitor getting sucked inside and getting killed, and you're coming around the corner, Fluffy pops out. Again, it was great working with Greg, because he actually had a whole set of molds for Fluffy, because he was good friends with Tom Savini. He interned under Tom when he was coming up as a makeup artist. So he had the complete, Fluffy molds from back in the day. So this will be right off the movie. So that's pretty cool. From here, we're starting with the classroom, and then we're going to the stairwell. So this door is not fixed open yet. We do a lot of what I would call practical effects in Horror Nights. We are kind of the keepers of the flame of the art of practical effects, because nowadays in movies, 99.9% of everything is computer animated when it comes to effects. But we operate as if we're back in the 80s, with Rick Baker and Stan Winston and those guys, because this is live. Everybody's walking through this as a live experience, so computer animation doesn't really work for that application. So we always rely on practical effects. Sometimes it's simple is better, and sometimes you can overcomplicate it. Like for this scene, there's a Blackout Performer, which is the name we give our performers who aren't seen on set, who are puppeteering things offset. And he's got a monitor and a camera feed, and he can see the guests coming, and he simply needs to rock this crate back and forth. And there's a point source audio, and it sounds like the Fluffy's crawled back inside his crate. You're following the trail of blood back to the spot. And then this will be Fluffy's hands sticking out of the crate. And the effects team were showing me design after design, and I'm like, no, it's like a bar stool, man. It's like, you ever gone to a bar and sat at a table, and one leg was shorter than the other, and it did this? And it's like, look at how easy that is. It works. So it's literally like, sometimes you can overthink these things. It's like, no, just make one leg shorter than the other, and then when you rock it, it'll rock. With a billionaire named Upson Pratt, who's kind of like Howard Hughes. He lives in a germ-proof apartment, but on this particular night, bugs have started coming into his apartment, particularly cockroaches. He's freaking out and calling everybody he can to deal with this, but it's the night when the big blackout in New York City happens back in the 70s. And then they go on the walls as well, and then there's projectors in the room. You can see them above us here before we cap the ceiling. That are also going to be projecting cockroaches running everywhere, and then Upson Pratt, who's running into the scene, freaking out, covered in cockroaches. And then we're going to take you around the corner and see that moment in the film when all the cockroaches burst out of his body, which is around the corner.
Oh gosh.
And there's a lot of projection involved in this too.
Oh gosh.
Take you into pitch darkness. You're going to feel things under your feet. Feels like you're stepping on cockroaches. You're going to feel them touching your body. And I'll just leave it at that. So,
oh boy. So much fun.
It's not fair.
And then we're going to transition into the new Shudder series. So the panel that sets up the next story is called Gray Matter. It's about a guy who, blue-collar worker, dad, loses his gig at the factory and just starts sitting around his apartment all day drinking this really cheap beer called Harrow's Beer, Harrow's Supreme Lager, which is like a reference to the original story it came from. But then one day he drinks like a bad beer, and things start to change both in his apartment and to his body. Like this weird fungusy mold starts growing everywhere in his apartment. He starts becoming really sensitive to light, so he starts blocking out all the windows with like old blankets and sheets and stuff. And then he has this insatiable desire for this beer, but he wants it like heated, warmed up. So his poor son has to keep coming back and coming back and coming back, and his dad starts to physically change, and he starts to become this gelatinous, blob-like creature, and then he starts absorbing other people. So this is the dad. He covers himself all up in sheets, so you can't quite see what's going on with him. And then there's a live performer, obviously, that comes into the scene, and you get the full reveal. It's a good example of the work our props and dressing crew has to do every year. I pull all these images from movies and television shows, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of them, and I give them to my art director to design the sets, and then he shows them to our props crew in order to replicate all the props and dressing. This is kind of both scenic and props and dressing. The scenic's doing all the spray foam for all this weird mold stuff growing everywhere. And then our prop crew comes in and does all the detail application to that. Everything in the room is teed down and dyed down and aged and yellowed and just looking fairly repulsive. And it just keeps getting worse as you go through the apartment. We start in the living room, and then you go into the kitchen, and it's just another mess like this. So make fake products and fake labels, just like movies and TV shows do. The coolest examples are up at Holidays in Hell, because we have a 4th of July scene that's like a roadside fireworks stand that sells fireworks and cigarettes, which is a really bad idea. So everything's on fire and blowing up, but all of the classic like fireworks companies you might remember from being a kid, we riffed on all of those and made our own versions of them, and they're quite funny. So you'll see there's a lot of amazing graphics in Holidays in Hell. And then we have to go into the bathroom, which I think is pretty dark last time I was in there. But you'll see the bodies of 2 little girls that strangely reference another very famous horror movie that involves 2 little twin girls.
Aha!
Bad Wolf Down, and all of this again is going to debut in September on Shudder. This story takes place in the north of France in the latter half of World War II, kind of around the time of the Battle of the Bulge. It's the last-ditch effort by the German army to try to break out. Squad, maybe? Yeah. It's only like 8 guys, but they end up behind enemy lines. A lot of them get killed, and the ones that are surviving take refuge in this old French jail in Nazi-occupied France. And they're surrounded, and they know that they're dead. They find a woman in the jail who's a French resistance worker that got locked up by the Germans. But there's something odd about her. They notice there's footprints on the ground, bloody footprints that look like paw prints, and there's scratch marks on the walls, and they find a dead soldier in there that's been ripped to pieces. And they start to put 2 and 2 together and go, she's a werewolf. They find posters all over the jail, warning of this wolf that's been attacking in the provinces. So they convince her to bite them, and it's a full moon, of course. So they turn into werewolf GIs, and that's how they defeat the enemy. So we had to recreate the French jail cell. One of them is inspired more like The Howling, and one of them is more like American Werewolf in London. So you get a triple werewolf treat on your way.
Nice.
So there's Dog Night. Exactly. With the dad berating his son about reading these comics, and you're going to come into an alley and you're going to find the comic book thrown away, and then this is a big poster that's going to be for the new Shudder series, but it's a split graphic spandex print, so that the creep gets you the last time. And that's Creepshow.